Hi, folks. I'm Ian Morgan. I'm Associate Artistic Director of the new group, Broadway Theater Company. And just a quick welcome to you. Thank you for joining us for our panel discussion this week as part of our Facing the Rising Tide Festival, in which we have readings of plays each night. And this particular panel is focused on climate arts Activision, which I will leave to the panelists to explain, but I want to just introduce quickly our moderator, Nancy Giles, who, hi Nancy.
Hey Ian, and everybody.
And everybody. Nancy works with us on our New Group Now series of panel discussions, and so delighted that she could join us for this one as part of this series. Nancy is an Emmy-winning contributor to CBS News Sunday Morning and on various political panels on MSNBC. She's acted in films and on TV and was recently in our own New Group show, Good for Otto by David Rave. She's also written and performed solo shows and is working on a collection of essays and true stories, and look out for her podcast, The Giles Files. Thank you so much for doing this, Nancy, and I will let you introduce the panel.
All right, Ian, thank you so much for that lovely intro. This is a panel on climate activism, arts, and storytelling. And we've got some wonderful, wonderful, talented artists. Chantal Bilodeau is a playwright and the artistic director of the Arctic Cycle. And Chantal's work focuses on the intersection of science, policy, art, and climate change. Welcome, Chantal.
Hi, Nancy. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Next up, Lydia Fort is a theater director and an educator, and she's directed over 30 productions across the United States. She's an assistant professor at Emory University, and she teaches courses in directing, acting, African-American drama, and eco-theater, and also serves as the director of the Playwriting Center of Theater, Emory. Welcome, Lydia.
Hello.
Hi. Next up, we have Lani Fu, who is a Chinese-American theater artist and co-director of Superhero Clubhouse, which is an interdisciplinary community engaged in theater making to shift culture toward climate and environmental justice. Hey, Lani.
Hey, everyone.
Hi. Next is Mary Catherine Nagel, who is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And Mary Catherine is also a partner at Pipestream Law, where she works to protect tribal sovereignty and the inherent right of Indian nations to protect their women and children from domestic violence and sexual assault. From 2015 to 2019, she served as the first executive director of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program. Hey, Mary Catherine.
Hello.
And last up is Cheryl Sleen, who is a playwright, filmmaker, and climate activist. She's the co-founder of Vision LA Climate Action Arts and creative director of Rewrite the Future, which is a climate storytelling in entertainment initiative at NRDC, which is the National Resources Defense Council. Hey, Cheryl.
Hey, that's Natural Resources Defense Council to you.
Natural, not national, but it should be national. Okay, natural.
It is international.
Why don't we start by, let me ask you about Rewrite the Future. Can you talk about a little bit about what that is?
Oh, sure. I'd love to. It is a new initiative in the communications department at the NRDC. And we started this, a couple of us who had backgrounds in documentary filmmaking, and from my side, narrative filmmaking and theater making. We had been working on climate and environmental messaging in our work for a while. And it just sort of occurred to us separately. I'm talking about Daniel Heinerfeld over at the NRDC. It occurred to us that we could reach a lot more people if we were working with the entertainment industry and in film and TV storytelling. And we were not seeing, as all of us know, we're not seeing very many climate stories on TV and films. So we wondered if we might be able to change that and advocate for more and more effective stories that have climate or sustainability content. And so we started working together, and we developed this initiative. It offers support for entertainment professionals who want to experiment with and find their way towards using more climate content in their stories, whether it's shows that are already on the air or developing new projects. It's really exciting and fun. We're getting a lot of interest too.
It sounds exciting, and it's interesting because, to be completely honest, like, I think of playwriting and art in one way, and I think of things like climate change and science in another way, and it's almost like the twain doesn't naturally, in my mind, meet. So I'll throw this to Chantal, because your work specifically focuses on that intersection, and I guess I'm interested in how you came up with that. I mean, I look around and I think trees make life better, and then my thoughts kind of, trail off. So how did you come to that intersection?
Well, I'm trained as a playwright, so it was natural to, whenever I started being concerned about the environment and climate justice and all of that, I was thinking about it in my personal life, but whenever I had the idea of marrying my professional life and those concerns, because I'm a playwright, the first thing I thought was, oh, let me write a play about it. And so storytelling was the first way I came at it. And then from there, it takes a long time to write a play, to develop a play, produce a play. And I'm like, none of this is going fast enough. There needs to be a lot more people who are doing this. And so I created this organization, the Arctic Cycle, and we developed more programs that involve more people, that put more stories into the world to try to have many voices and have those circulate a lot more than one person could do with one play.
That makes sense. I'm going to sort of ask random questions to different of you artists, to various artists, but if anybody wants to jump in and also answer the question, feel free. Mary Catherine, I want to ask you about this sort of umbrella term, climate storytelling. So can you talk to us about your understanding of that term and how you approach these kind of climate related topics and the work that you do?
It's a great question. And I think, to Cheryl's work, it's so critical that we get climate narratives into mainstream media. Research has shown, I do a lot of work as a lawyer, but you can argue until you're blue in the face about all kinds of Supreme Court precedents. And in fact, apologies for the background noise. My fiance is doing that right now on the phone. But Creek Nation just won this huge case in the Supreme Court, and now Senator been threatening to attach a midnight rider and just establish their reservation. So it's been 24/7 over here. But
wow.
Yeah, so we can, whether it's tribal sovereignty or safety for Native women or climate change, I file briefs all the time. And yes, we just had a historic win in the Supreme Court. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the law is based on stories that we tell ourselves. And sometimes those stories are really problematic. Like, Native Americans are racially inferior, therefore they can't claim legal title to their land. That was a Supreme Court case from 1823, right? Like that's not such a great idea, but you can see the legal narrative from that, right? Like it's based, I think, on a fictional prejudice that's not based on factual reality. But how do you change that? You can argue it, you can write briefs about it, but you've got to shift the narrative and what people think and feel about something. And that's where you need art, and that's where you need storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that film, TV, and theater, and of course I'm very partial to theater, but they're all important mediums, can do better than any legal brief you write or any sort of legal argument you make. And I think when it comes to climate storytelling, we have got to share, because what happens a lot when we talk about it in a political sense is it's very easy to cut out the humans whose lives are directly impacted, right? We have to humanize climate change because it's not something that unfortunately just our children or our grandchildren will be dealing with. People are dealing with it right now. Yeah. And mostly marginalized communities of color. And so, to be able to bring those stories out, because they are being silenced right now or just simply overlooked, I think is something that theater is uniquely positioned to do.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on what you just said, Mary Catherine, and go to Lydia, because, many people, when they think of issues of climate change or global warming, people of color are sort of not in the conversation. You see, it's mostly maybe, the people that are called tree huggers, mostly white, mostly young, maybe hippie types and whatnot. And as far as the African American experience in this country, I mean, we came here and we tilled the soil. We started out working in climates and with tools like that. Has that, no pun intended, colored your approach to the work that you're doing with this initiative?
It's interesting that you say colored in that.
Or impacted, you know what I mean?
It hasn't necessarily colored it. It has become a question about, for me anyway, about like, where are we in this particular place of storytelling and sharing our experience? And I find it incredibly fascinating that, yes, absolutely, you know, my own grandfather was a sharecropper, right? So the idea of how we've moved from the land to, or how we've been removed, right, from being close to the land to where we are now as African Americans. It's unfortunate in some ways, right, because we've lost that connection and sense of responsibility directly in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I have noticed is that Flint sort of moved conversation in terms of theater making and storytelling for people. I think there was several different plays that I've come across, actually Katrina as well. A number of stories came out of that. So a lot of what I've seen in terms of BIPOC artists and playwrights has to do with environmental justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been tremendous. And I think that's, you know, for obvious reasons, as Mary Catherine has said, right, this is how we're being impacted. So I am always looking for more and more stories to be able to share with people that feature writers and others of color.
It's fascinating because, again, like I started out by saying that, I mean, I'm speaking sort of as every man, every person, but the idea of climate change has sort of been on one side and then artistry has been on another. And Lanny, I guess I'm thinking, when you work with this topic, there's all kinds of ways to tell the stories. I mean, I'm thinking that a big way that this country started embracing LGBTQ issues was Will and Grace, which is a comedy. I mean, it may seem simplistic on one end, but it opened a lot of doors. What kinds of styles have you used in your work? Have you used comedy, poetry, narrative? How are you approaching this?
That's a really interesting question. I think that the way that I've approached this work as an artist and as an organizer, I feel like has had a really wide range. I feel like I create plays as myself as an artist with other artist collaborators. I also create plays on interdisciplinary teams of artists and scientists and other folks. And we also run a variety of programs that are intended to engage young people on the front lines of the climate crisis in active imagination for the future. And I think that honestly, I don't think there is a particular form that is something that I always stick to in all of my work. I think that there are tools and values that we carry with us in all of our work, and that there's the biggest thing I think is you bring up that the fact that Will and Grace is a comedy and kind of surprising to think how much a light and comedic thing can bring about such change, or can even tackle a more serious social issue.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is actually what's needed here. I think that something that is central to all of the work that I strive to do and that my organization strives to do is hope. And I think that if we're talking about form or approach, the biggest thing that I would say is hope and uplifting imagination, and not creating narratives of fear or doom, because I really do believe that apocalypse is a very privileged narrative, and that we need to that hope is a better thing to center if we're talking about resilient societies.
Can you speak a little more about what you just said about apocalypse as a privileged narrative? I think I know what you mean, but please expand on that, because I'll tell you, there have been so many apocalyptic dramas and series, and we all have a lot of time on our hands to catch up on things on Netflix, and I can't watch. Maybe I'm the only person who's not into The Walking Dead, but whatever. I mean, can you talk about that a little bit? I want to make sure I understand what you mean. I think I get it.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about it. I think that it connects a lot to what Mary Catherine was bringing up, which is like, this is happening already to people all over the world, and especially to marginalized communities. It is not something that is future and distant, and it's not something that we can afford to say, the world's going to end, so we're going to, the narrative is saying the world is going to end, so let's give ourselves permission to lean into fantasies about what happens at the edge of the world and how we're going to respond to that and how we're going to protect ourselves when the world is ending for people now already.
Wow.
All over. And so like I think that it's a very distant perspective, and it's a perspective that allows for, that doesn't acknowledge the resilience of people, Indigenous people, people of color who've been experiencing these impacts and also leading the fight for resilience and for change.
Mary Catherine, I see you nodding. I feel like you want to lean in there.
Sorry, I keep putting myself on mute because I've got kids in the background and all kinds of loud noises. But absolutely, and I just think I have so many thoughts on how we got to this place. But watching what happened at Standing Rock and being there and seeing sort of how it started as a movement brought by Native youth, the youth at Standing Rock and Cheyenne River Sioux, who stood up for their community, and how it kind of became this national movement that took on messaging that wasn't necessarily the youth's messaging or the tribe's messaging, and it kind of got, co-opted into this larger environmental movement. But really, in the end, the goal for a lot of the folks there was the same, right? Was to stop the pipeline. Mm-hmm. But it's just interesting to think about how, being an environmentalist is sort of a more recent thing in human history that we talk about and think about. And a lot of times people will say, well, Native folks they're just environmentalists because they're Native. And, and there's some truth to that, and then some false associations as well, right? And it's hard to explain because it doesn't fit exactly in this environmentalism framework. And in fact, a lot of times, we're at odds with, a lot of times we're on the same side of environmentalists, but sometimes we're at odds with them because it comes down to our understanding of who we are and our identity as a person, as a human, and as a nation, whether it's my nation's Cherokee Nation or Standing Rock Sioux Tribe or, you name it, is tied up in our origin stories of being placed where we are with a duty and a responsibility to preserve the land for the next 7 generations that come after us. So it's never been just about us, right? It's never, and that's a different, it's just a slightly different perspective on environmentalism. But actually, when you look at the history of the laws in the United States, that oftentimes has been the basis or the rationale for limiting tribal jurisdiction and sovereignty over our own lands, because we weren't commercially exploiting them in a civilized manner. And so it's just interesting to see that be sort of at the beginning of the United States history, the justification for taking land from us, and now kind of the slow reversal coming back to, well, what you saw at Standing Rock was non-natives standing with a tribal nation and saying mostly, we support you here. And, maybe we'll just continue to see more of that.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating.
Oh,
yes,
sorry about
do.
that, Nancy. I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off. What Lanny and Mary Catherine were saying was so inspiring to me about, the privileged, how apocalypse narratives are privileged narratives. I really love that. And also that connects in with what Mary Catherine was saying about the perspective or view that that creates those kinds of stories that, we call it apocalypse porn, where there's just like this
Wow.
disattachment. I'm sorry, that's
no, but it makes sense. It makes complete
irreverent
sense. Yeah.
It's very much, we never know, we hardly ever know what caused the apocalypse. There's never any sort of attribution to a causal, agency by human beings. And so in terms of storytelling, if you're going to be telling a story about the climate apocalypse, at least attribute it to burning fossil fuels and the attitudes, the underlying attitudes in our society that allow us to continue with that sort of destructive status quo. That is, as everyone's pointing out, is destroying people's lives and livelihoods and ecologies, ecosystems where that they depend on right now, and worse, and for everyone into the future. But what I find that I wanted to point to was when we're looking at a creator's perspective. It's like creative people, writers, directors, and whatnot, we are embedded in our cultural narratives. And so we're going to be telling the stories that reflect our understanding of that issue right now. So our understanding may be as someone who is directly impacted right now by the effects of climate and environmental, destruction. Or it might be reflecting what the mainstream cultural narrative about climate is, which is very negative. It's the news, the news narratives are sort of very negative news bias, they call it. It's like all about, the news is all about the horrors coming at us. All of these reports that are talking about this terrible future where we're heading, and we're immersed in that information. And those are the sort of narratives we build and are immersed in as a culture. And that's what we're going to write from. So one of the things that we've seen that's necessary and that we're trying to bring in our program is, like broadening the base of understanding about climate impacts as well as solutions. Circling back to what Lanny said about hope, it's like, in fact, people don't know about it because it's not in the news very much, but there is an incredible amount of resilience and solutions, innovation, and experimentation going on the local and regional level all over the world. And that is exactly how I get through my day, by, a steady diet of that stuff. That's how I sort of keep myself going. And so I'm just very curious as an artist myself, like how to tell the solution stories, how to show the drama of this immensely, like heroic and courageous drama that we are all engaged in shifting the paradigm of our culture to be more in alignment with like indigenous values, where we have a completely different relationship to the earth. What are those stories? The people all over that are awakening to that are being inspired by people who are leading the way. Telling stories about those folks who are the, as it's called in the literature, the positive outliers of society. I want to see more of those stories to help us fill in the gap.
That's wonderful, and that's a great jumping off point. Chantal, Lydia, anybody can jump in on that. Like, where are you guys finding the inspiration to tell those stories? What's your approach? How is that hopefully like lighting a fire for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to what Mary Catherine, actually what everybody was saying, and I read something recently, and I can't remember who wrote it, but someone who said it's much easier to write apocalypse and dystopian worlds because you just extrapolate from what you know, from what's now, and you make it worse. But imagining something different is imagining something different. So there's a leap there, right? It's much more difficult. And I find myself, like, even when I write stuff, I'm like, how do I take it to the next step without, telling people, put solar panels on your house? I mean, it's a little too simplistic. But when the initiative, actually, many people here know and or have participated. We have this initiative called Climate Change Theater Action, where we ask every 2 years, we ask 50 playwrights from around the world to write 5-minute plays. And of course, I don't want to tell anybody what to do, but I am always trying. I'm always trying to push towards the positive, and so we give a prompt. Like that's our little trick, we give a prompt to try to encourage people to think in a different way than just the apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And one more thing I wanted to say about these negative scenarios is it's for the last 50 years, more or less, artists have been encouraged to like dig deep inside. And it was always like, you don't think about how it's going to be received. That's not your job, right? You just express what you have to express, and then you put it out there, and then it just has to live on its own. And I think that is or has to shift a little bit here, where we have to be conscious about what we're communicating. Not to say that we become in service of society, that's probably going too far, but I think there's also a responsibility. I think it's too easy for artists to be the only people in the world who are not responsible for what they put out there. Wow. And so I think that's a big paradigm shift in how the arts world has worked.
No, I can see that. And you're saying that, it's making me think of something that's sort of connected, but not really. And Lydia, I want to throw this to you. I saw, I think this might have been in March or April, as the pandemic was raging more in Europe and then making its way here. I saw a scene of wild boars wandering around the empty streets of Spain. And at first I was like, oh my God, just the idea of these like, what the hell, it was so overwhelming. And then I was like really sort of thrilled by that idea that nature was kind of reclaiming its space. And I guess my question is, just thinking of the pandemic and what's happened globally and what's happened in this country, how has that shaped your approach to the kind of work that you're doing?
I am definitely one of those people who feels like, they are all connected, right? The pandemic, Black Lives Matters, where we are in terms of how we view and our relationship to the environment, all of these things are connected by the same troubling sort of source. And right. So I think that I'll also put myself in that category of, probably people will call me a tree hugger, and people probably already do, because I'll be in front of my class and I'll try to be talking about spirituality, and they all think, what the hell? For. But it's a stunning sort of thing to think about, how our relationship to each other and to our place is completely disconnected. And I think so much of this has to do with the things that we've already heard a lot about. And is even highlighted in what Chantal was talking about, how artists view their work and their responsibility of their work to others. That we have this overwhelming sense of identity that says that I'm an individual, and all that I need to care about is furthering my own sort of cause or issues, or protecting my own. And that's incredibly problematic. That for me, when I think about all of these things, it feels like there's I don't want to say easier, but there's a way to kind of get at all of it, just in terms of how we look at our relationships.
Right.
And what are the things that we value.
Right. I didn't mean to cut you off, but yes, I'm agreeing in a less kind of, not self-involved, but I don't know what I mean. I'm gesturing, but I mean sort of like an inward way and more outward or something like that. Mm-hmm. I look to you ladies to help me clean that part up. The plays that are in the festival aren't only what we normally think about when it comes to climate stuff, like sea levels and superstorms and heat waves. But this is interesting. All these intersectional social problems that people, including me, might not realize that climate change has a connection with: immigration, migration, gender, reproductive justice, public health, economic disparities. I'm going to throw this out to all of you. Any or all of you can answer that. If you find that those connections are in your work, and what particular intersectional issues are you all drawn to exploring, and then why? Anyone?
I'll just say that I'm interested in all of it. And maybe it's just the fact that as a director, I'm trained to think about the big sort of forest instead of trees, or the relationship between trees and forest. But it is like I personally can't just like zone in on one thing, because I do think that they're all connected. I do think that our interdependence is crucial in how we look at all of these issues. If we can begin to connect them together,
that's so important.
It is. It's huge. It's the beginning of being able to really make change, like Chantal is saying. Like, how do we imagine it? We have to see the interconnectedness of all of these things.
I agree. Anybody else? I mean, even talking to you guys, you women, I'm starting to sew all of this stuff together in ways that I never thought of before. And I consider myself a writer and an artist, but I, like many people, have thought of these things in separate boxes. Like, they haven't really merged for me. So the work you're doing is so important.
Well, I think I would say.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I would say the public health part has become abundantly apparent right now with the pandemic, and then we read like fire season. Wildfire season is starting soon. Hurricane season is coming. So these things compound each other, and if we don't have a good public health system, it all falls apart. And of course, it's the people who are the most marginalized, the more who have more economic disparity that are the most affected.
Mm-hmm. Mary Catherine, were you about to say something? I thought I saw, or Lonnie, both of you were nodding.
Go for it, Mary Catherine.
Okay. Well, I in terms of, I've written probably 2 plays that I think deal with climate change most directly, although I would actually make the argument that because all of my plays relate to colonization of indigenous lands and nations, that's how climate change got started.
Hey, man. If it works, use it.
So, actually, I started writing one of my plays fairly traceable because it had impacted my life directly. And, to be very clear, I have lost very little compared to a lot of people to climate change. So I do not mean to make this in any kind of way like a pity party, because I'm very fortunate and very privileged to have what I have. But I was going to law school in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit, and that was a very impactful experience. And then the town where I grew up, and my dad and sister and mom and my sister's husband and all lived still, where I grew up, was hit by one of the worst tornadoes in the history of humankind. It was in Joplin, Missouri, and a mile-wide tornado. I grew up there, and I was born in Oklahoma, and I've lived in Joplin's like 10 miles from Oklahoma. That area gets tornadoes all the time, but it's like an F1 or an F2, and every now and then someone unfortunately dies. But we didn't have mile-wide tornadoes all the time growing up, and now it's frighteningly not uncommon anymore somehow. And we've just this is like the new norm, because Joplin happened, and then all of a sudden more Oklahoma happened, and then El Reno, Oklahoma happened, and these mile-wide F5s, like everyone's like, well, that's just Oklahoma and Joplin, Missouri. Since when? And now we have more earthquakes in Oklahoma than California, and that's because of fracking, which some people are still denying in our government for some reason. But so I just, to me, I also, a lot of my fellow citizens in Oklahoma and even in Missouri deny climate change still to this day, or have that kind of attitude, like what we're talking about, this, it's which is also very sad too, because don't you care about your children and your grandchildren? How does that make it less urgent? But whatever, apparently that's a psychological mindset that some people have. And so I just started wanting to place it in my home communities where I was, with people I knew who were real life people in my life, to just really try to kind of connect it to just our everyday communities and lives and what we know, because that's the reality of it, right? But I do think that those events also, just personally for me, the Hurricane Katrina and then the Joplin tornado were very impactful in how I see climate change as well.
Lenny?
I almost forgot what the original question was. I think
To be fair, I sort of didn't answer it because I like
No.
I sort of went off in a different direction. It was actually related to the question originally, but then
they're all connected. I think I was talking about COVID-19 and just how that might have helped shape this moment for people, you know, because as you were saying, Mary Catherine, as all of you were saying, there's real stuff that is connected to how the climate is. I mean, there's food shortages, major food shortages now, and in a country where we should be able to grow and eat our own food and you know, anyway, I don't mean to cut you off or stop you, Lenny. Maybe I hope that helped you.
Yeah, totally. I just want to echo and support what has already been said about, you know, the interconnected nature of all these things. And I want to highlight something that I think everyone is getting at, that like, it's not just that the impacts are interconnected and that we can see how climate change exacerbates these other issues that we face, but it's also that it, like, foundationally, the root of these issues that we face is the same. And like, that is the thing that I think makes it hard to say, oh, I care about one issue a little bit more than the other, because I feel like what this pandemic in this moment is exposing for a lot of people in a new way is kind of like breaking open their assumptions about like what the world is or should be, and like what the systems that are and should be. And it actually has the potential to be a really transformative moment in which we actually look to the root of what is happening. Like, I love the phrase, what you do to the land, you do to the people, because that has been our issue, as Mary Catherine is saying, forever, which is that we engage in extractive relationships, not only with the land, but with each other. And like, and how do we really, really shift systems? I feel like if we attend to that and we attend to relationship in the way Lydia is talking about, then it actually touches so many of these issues that we're talking about.
You know, from a gender standpoint, I'm struck by the fact that, Cheryl, this is an initiative that you had a lot to do with, and that I'm talking to all female playwrights. And I guess I have to ask, if do you all think that women can approach this topic in a way that men can't, or differently, or am I making an assumption I shouldn't, or what do you think?
Well, we know Chantal has broached this topic. So I don't know if you'd like to share your thoughts, but
Please do.
Cheryl, do you want to, you put together the panel. Do you want to speak to that first?
Well, it wasn't, I didn't plan to have the panel be all women, but I think it's pretty awesome and kick-ass that it is. You know, I think that there seem to be a lot more women in, this is totally anecdotal, that are engaged with these big, that are willing to leave the status quo, or I don't know, that are leading the way to make big changes. That are environmentally concerned, that are acting in the world from care versus self-interest. It's totally generalizing. I really don't want to exclude men, because I work with a lot of great men who have those same values. But I smiled when you were asking the question, Nancy, because I'm working on a piece right now where I'm looking at it and going, oh, the men are all bad guys. Maybe I should. I mean, they're complex bad guys. I know why they're not bad guys because they're evil or anything. They're just acting selfishly, you know. And but everybody is in their own way. But I don't know why that is, except that I want in my stories, and for all the time I've been writing. When I first started writing, this was actually an unusual thing because I'm old. But all my main characters were women, because I wanted the women,
not old,
older.
Please go on.
I wanted the women
that.
Okay, sorry. Thanks for correcting. I'm not. Yeah. The women had to have agency. I wanted the women to have agency because that's who I was in my life, and I wanted my women characters to reflect that. The women drive the story. They are the engine, the agent in this story, main character. And so, in a story that is about, a woman coming to terms with some aspect of the climate crisis, and coming to terms with her feelings about it and her part in it, and rousing herself to become part of the solution, which is basically what this story is about. Then she's the good guy. She's the active change maker in the story, and she's going to be a woman. And then her antagonist happens to be a man in this one, but maybe I should think about that.
Or maybe not. I mean, we might be onto something here. You had a really cool quote that I want to read to everybody and find out what people think about it. The quote is, "We find in our audience research that even the alarmed, those most concerned about climate change, don't really know what they can do individually or what we can do collectively. We call this loosely the hope gap, and it's a serious problem. Perceived threat without efficacy of response is usually a recipe for disengagement or fatalism." And that's from Anthony Leiserowitz. I think I said that right. Director of the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. What do you guys think about that? I keep saying guys, I hope you don't mind. What do you all think about this? Do you think, you've already spoke to this a bit, but I guess I want to dig a little deeper. Do you think that the arts and storytelling can really help bridge that hope gap? I open this to anyone.
I would say, coming from the theater, you're not going to get a climate denier to go see a play about climate change, right? I mean, unless they know somebody. Well, sometimes, like I've had one case where it was the father of a person who was in the cast, and so he came to support his son. But so I think our job mostly is to talk to these people who are concerned, who are interested, but they might not have taken the extra step, and then to help them move one step further. That's probably the best we can hope for, and in a way it may be the most useful, because they're already oriented that way. They just need a little bit more push to be a bit more active.
I like that answer. Anyone else?
I also want to uplift what Chantal was saying earlier about imagination. I feel like that is the power of the art form of theater, in my opinion, and in a lot of art forms, is that there is a chance for not only the artist to be imaginative, but for folks who are coming into the experience and the process and participating in that art that you create, in whatever way they participate, to have their imagination stimulated in a way that allows for new possibilities, and because we can't, as Chantal was saying, like we can't create or build what we can't imagine. We have to first imagine it together.
Yes, and I so agree with that. This is one of the great offerings that that storytelling creative artists have to give to the world, is that we are world builders. We can imagine alternate futures, and I mean, I just wanted to put in a plug, I guess, for an event, a webinar event that we're putting together at Rewrite the Future, which is, I think it's called now Beyond Apocalypse, Alternative Futures in Climate Entertainment, and we're going to bring some. We're going to try to get. I don't know if I should say names, but let me just say we're really inspired by Christiana Figueroa's new book called The Future We Choose. I really highly recommend it. The first 2 chapters do just what Lanny said. They're, from a factual point of view, it's like futurism, the future that we're heading to if we do nothing, which is pretty darn bleak. And you know, this is what we generally see most of the climate storytelling is those kinds of futures versus what if we actually meet the Paris targets and all of the 5-year increases in those targets that would allow us to keep the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Like, what would our future look like then? Because we don't have those pictures in our collective imaginations in this culture. What might our futures look like? And so Christiana, I've listened to the book on tape, and she reads her chapter and about how much more, not just, you know, healthy, but safe and equitable and great jobs and all of these things that might come if we solve this crisis, if we take the crisis as an opportunity to really change in all of these intersectional problems, the roots of the problems, and create a more sustainable world. It would also be a more just world. It would also, you know, for all people, right? That's the dream. That's the hope. That's the aim, and it's built into the sort of decarbonization or regenerative economy mission. So I think that those two chapters, like seeing them side by side like that, is quite stark. It's quite imaginatively stimulating. It helps us to choose the one we want, the future we want. And then, of course, the rest of the book is how do we get there? So we're doing this event to ask, in this case, Hollywood storytellers, like, how do we tell these stories?
Right.
How do we bring this into the public imagination? All those people who aren't going to be reading that book.
Right. That's important because they will see a play. They may see a television show or a film a lot quicker than they would read a book. I can't remember what it is that you just said, Cheryl, but it made me remember the fact that some of the best plays that I've ever seen or been a part of are plays that I've done with a group in New York called the 52nd Street Project, which are children. And sometimes the adults write for the children. Sometimes, well, I say children, sometimes the young people do the writing. And it's their writing that I find incredibly profound and deep. And Lenny, I'll throw this to you first, but I'm wondering for all of you, because you work with this superhero clubhouse, and I'm wondering if any of the stuff that is created for young people or that young people create, what they're saying and how they're approaching these issues.
Yeah, for sure. We do. Yeah, we run a program with our partners, the Bushwick Star, called Big Green Theater, where we work with North Brooklyn public school students.
Wonderful.
And they write plays that are then professionally produced at the Star. And yeah, I think that they're, like we always say in the program, they are the best playwrights that we've ever worked with. They're just like so expansive and wildly imaginative that the way that they receive the same information, the same research that we do, and then what they do with it is like, it's pretty magical. And also they're not afraid of leaning into magical thinking or magical storytelling as a way of reflecting their goals or visions. They're not really that, I love that they're not that concerned with reality in the sense of like, yes, they are concerned with the real life issues that we're dealing with, but they are not concerned. They use all these like fantastic imaginative stories as a way to illustrate some of the shifts in relationship, shifts in power, shifts in practice that in their vision need to happen, rather than just, you know, saying it.
Yeah, I think it was what you said. It was that word imagination that made me start thinking of how young people, how kids write. Before we have to wrap up, I just want to ask you, just going to that question about children, imagination, and childlike thinking, I want to ask it of all of you. Like, when you were younger, what did you think about the climate and about the earth and whatnot? Just very quickly, if I could get some idea from all of you where your head was at when you were, let's say, 10 years old. Do you remember? Lydia, let's start with you.
The thing that I can remember most was the ozone. That was huge for me as I was growing up. I don't know if it was the first thing that left an impression, but it definitely is the one that I remember now.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Chantal?
I grew up spending my summers in the forest. My father was a hunter fisherman, and he also had a small plane on floats where he would go to. I lived in Canada, where he would go to lakes that were only accessible by plane. So I grew up, I guess, with an idea of big nature.
Oh my. Oh my. Mary Catherine?
Well, for some reason, when you asked that question, the first thing that came to mind was just my memory of where I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma and southwestern Missouri was the world's largest lead mining site during World War II. That's where we got the lead for our bullets. And there are still massive places of environmental destruction on the Quapaw Reservation there and elsewhere. But when I was 10, the EPA came in and removed our soil in all the yards in our neighborhood because it had higher than human safe levels of lead. And I just remember I love my stepmom, but at the time she was so upset because of like her flowers and everything, but as a kid, it just was like this weird, I just remember trying to get my head around why all of a sudden the top 6 inches of all the soil in our neighborhood was gone. And because of the lead mining.
Oh my goodness. And Cheryl, I'm going to end with you because this whole initiative is something that you were so involved with. What do you remember about when you were 10 when it comes to the climate and the atmosphere?
Well, I don't think we've gone to Lanny yet.
Oh my gosh, Lanny, I'm so
but
sorry.
I'm happy
Thank you,
to
Cheryl.
share, and we can end with Lanny. That's fine. I just want to make sure we don't exclude her. I spent a lot of time in nature where I grew up. I was in the ocean a lot, and I was out. I spent as much time as I could out in the open field canyons in the San Diego areas where I grew up. So I felt a real affinity for the wildlife, the little wildlife, the lizards and the birds, and and some of my the kids in my neighborhood would catch what we called horned toads, and they we call them alligator lizards. The boys, would catch them and do things like cut off their tails and put salt on slugs and stuff. And I just remember feeling so deeply pained about them hurting these innocent creatures that I felt like were my friends. It would be as if they had, punched me or somebody. Exactly the same feeling. And I just remember that. Actually, I was a shy kid, but I just stood up for the horny toads.
Oh my God.
I would lecture these boys and I would set them free as much as I could.
Standing up for the horny toad should either be the name of a play or a band. I don't know. Any of you can run with it. And Lanny, what about you? What do you remember about you as a youngster with regard to the climate?
I remember actually being very disconnected from environment and climate as a young person growing up in first in a very poor urban area and then a suburb. I feel like I didn't really have any kind of visceral experience until I was a young adult, and I went to college in Southwest Virginia, which is coal country, and witnessing mountaintop removal and getting to know the pain of those communities. That was my first kind of very visceral, whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. We are kind of even a little bit over time with this discussion, but I want to thank all of you, Chantal, Lydia, Cheryl, Mary Catherine, and Lanny. You guys have been wonderful. For more information on the Facing the Rising Tide Festival and the Rewrite the Future initiative, you can visit the New Group's website. And stay tuned now for the reading of Jessica Huang's play, Mother of Exiles, which is going to start right after this. And shortly after we're done here, all you need to do is refresh your browser to get the live stream, and you'll see exactly the kind of work this panel was talking about. Thank you all for being part of this, and thank you for joining. And all of you, take care. Thank you for the work that you do. And thanks to the New Group.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, everyone.
So great to see you.
Wonderful talking to you.
Take good care, everybody.
Take care.